Abby and I both had a comparison in mind when we saw the testimony, which was she kind of reminded me of Regina George a little bit.
Who's caught lying throughout this testimony? Deflection is what it seems to me everyone's been doing in terms of this. Like, why are you getting so angry? Why are you mixing up your story so much?
Exonerate Trump only if he pardons me.
Like,
Like,
I
what?
only
DOJ can walk and chew gum at the same time, and they should.
You don't tell me.
Yeah, I did tell you because we saw what you did.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Washed Up. I'm Abby. This is Colin. It is currently February 14th, and we are commenting on the weekly news so that you don't have to listen to the legacy media that your grandparents do.
Yeah, happy Valentine's Day, everyone. This is episode 41 of Washed Up, and it's going to be another hard-hitting one
Yeah.
because we're continuing our momentum talking about Epstein last week and probably providing some updates along the way to all the crazy stuff that happened in January.
Nothing screams Valentine's Day like talking about Pam Bondi this morning. Her testimony was very interesting, very lot of deflection, I want to say. What were your insights and takes on what they were talking about?
Yeah, so she testified on February 11th, and it was definitely the talk of the town here in DC. I think a lot of people tuned in for it just because we've kind of been waiting for this for a while. She has been the Attorney General since Trump took office a second time and has kind of been, indicating like we're going to release a bunch of stuff, then the stuff that she had to release didn't exist, and then suddenly it does again. And the Epstein Transparency Act caused the release of the files from the DOJ about Epstein, and now she's there to answer for, I guess, why the process was so stalled and messy. And people were calling into question certain aspects of the DOJ's handling of it, like why did you redact so much of it? Why is this part not included? And then other stuff that they did release that they shouldn't have, such as victims' names, and just, yeah, the overall way that the DOJ has handled it.
People are really upset about the fact that they're also not really looking into certain people who have ties to Epstein as well. And I mean, she was very deflective in a lot of her answers, talking about how Trump is the most transparent president there's ever been, greatest president, American president ever, asking kind of, yeah, like she even accused them of being deflective when I think that she was mostly the one shooting back and being like, well, why aren't we looking into this? Or I don't know what you're talking about. Or she had said, what do ties even mean?
Yeah, the best way to characterize it, I would say, is that it was very antagonistic, especially on Pam Bondi's part. And Abby and I both had a comparison in mind when we saw the testimony, which was she kind of reminded me of Regina George a little bit from Mean Girls. And especially there was this one part where they had a bunch of people behind Bondi stand up, and someone said, if anyone here has been victimized by Epstein, please stand and raise your hand if you haven't yet met with the DOJ to give your testimony. And everyone behind her basically stood up and raised their hand. And it reminded me of this scene in Mean Girls where the Tina Fey character, the teacher, is like, please raise your hand if you've been personally victimized by Regina George. And everyone does. Everyone raises their hand.
Because some of us are just victims in the situation? That's probably true. How many of you have ever felt personally victimized by Regina George?
It reminded me very much of that because Pam Bondi leading the DOJ is kind of the one responsible for how the investigation into Epstein unfolds and to what degree they're actively investigating and taking testimonies and, kind of delivering on their promise to be transparent. And so I thought that that was a really stark moment.
Yeah, I really liked that comparison that we were talking about. It was super funny. I think that she had a lot of non-answers too, which people have been talking about. But if you actually watch the testimony, it is a little bit entertaining for sure. Like we were kind of talking off camera about how sometimes these things feel a little bit like people just say things to get sound bites out of or make it, more popularized to their side and like getting people to respect them more or, be like, oh, they really do believe that. But some people aren't the best actors when it comes to things like that too. That being said, there were some pretty funny sound bites. Pam Bondi called somebody a washed up lawyer.
No way. And I told you about that, Attorney General, before you started.
You don't tell me.
Yeah, I did tell you because we saw what you did in the
You're
Senate.
a lawyer, not even a lawyer.
Committee will be in order.
Which we said was a direct shout out to us.
Yeah, that was hilarious.
That was Raskin.
And to your point, definitely congressional testimonies are known to be kind of performative, and I think they literally will rehearse them on some occasions. With like the witnesses will rehearse, and so will the members who are asking questions. And so it does feel very theatrical. And Bondi was even calling that out on occasion, saying like, "This is all just theatrics and this and that." And she was kind of lobbing that at the members, saying like, "It's all just a show to you," which to me felt like, again,
Projection.
all accusations are have a degree of confession to them, and I thought Bondi was treating it like a rehearsed performance as well. Although, in my speculation, I think her performance time was a little bit truncated because she delivered a very poor performance at this hearing.
Yeah. What were some things that stood out to you in terms of like what she was saying or maybe questions that she was asked?
Well, the viral clip that was going around was that Nadler or someone, I think, one of the members asked her about Trump's involvement with young girls and underage girls and if they had looked into that at DOJ specifically. And she went into this crazy long-winded rant about the Dow is over 50,000, and then she like consults her notes, $50,000 right now, and NASDAQ is surging and the economy is doing so great. And then she's like, I don't know why you're laughing, Nadler or Raskin. I don't know why you're laughing, Raskin, because I hear you're a pretty good stock trader yourself.
One word about Jeffrey Epstein. How ironic is that? You know why? Because Donald Trump, the Dow right now is over $50,000. I don't know why you're laughing. You're a great stock trader, as I hear, Raskin. The Dow is over 50,000 right now.
And she just got very defensive, very deflecting about the question that was asked directly.
Which wasn't even the question. Like she
Right.
didn't even answer. Like I said, it was a
It was
non-answer.
crazy.
Um,
Went so viral. I mean, people were like turning it into memes and songs, and the Gregory brothers did like a songified the news about it, and it was great.
yeah, I saw a soundbite that I saw going around a lot was when the representative from Vermont said this is not a game secretary, and she said Pam Bondi said I'm Attorney General, and then she goes, my apologies, I couldn't tell.
Yeah, that was another funny one because that same representative, it escalated from there even,
hmm
where Bondi like pulled out her burn book, as some people were calling it, and she was saying, well, like, I noticed that you voted against this anti-Semitism free speech law, and you're like okay with anti-Semitism, essentially is what she was insinuating. And the representative shot back. She's like, "Oh, are we gonna go there? Are we gonna go there? Someone who lost their grandfather in the Holocaust," and she was just like letting Bondi have it. Rightfully so, I think. I think
Yeah,
it's
I think so
crazy.
too. 100%.
Like that is not a way to show up to a hearing, to bring like a burn book on all the people who are going to be questioning you and just throw the harshest accusations against them as you can instead of actually answering their
And
questions.
she was interrupting so much too. And, like it was proven when they all got time back, whether that be like 20 seconds or 45, like there was a lot of people being like, please, time back, time back. Like, this is not, she even got schooled about like, you're not allowed to interrupt and things like that. Like, this is how this works. Like, we're asking you questions and you're not even answering them or being direct or anything like that.
Yeah, and so another example, she got into a spat with Thomas Massie about the release of like victims' names because like we said, some of the documents that were supposed to be redacted under the Transparency Act actually had information about victims. And so she got into a fight with Massie about that. Did you catch that one?
Um, yeah, what I think it was I mean I think that was a valid fight to get into. I'm glad that they brought it up, honestly.
I think she was accusing Massie of sort of being like partisan, even though he's been kind of joining with some Democrats on this to bring out this information and get the Transparency Act passed. But she was accusing him of being a failed politician,
hmm
which is dumb. There's now talk of like people are going to primary Massie essentially, even though he's a Republican, that a bunch of big Republican donors are going to pay so that Massie will not be the candidate for his seat anymore.
Which I think is really stupid too. I think that the lesson in this too is that none of this should be partisan in general. Like this is a whole bigger thing and bigger like web of people over, the right or the left. There's guilty people on both sides. I don't understand why people are even bringing partisan politics up into it, or why we're talking about like the way that Pam Bondi was attacking each person in her quote like b b burn book. Like I don't think that that was the right way to go about it at all.
Definitely. And so, like we had said, some of the members of Congress have gone into DOJ to review some of the unredacted files, which the DOJ promised that they would be able to do.
Hmm.
But a lot of them reported, so some examples, Kana went, Massie went, Boebert, Mace, Raskin, Lansbury, several others. But they all went and got to view the files unredacted, allegedly. But in fact, when they went in, a lot of the files were still redacted.
I think they reported that 70 to 80% of the files were still redacted. And there are some people I think who are making a bit of an argument about, privacy and people's names not having to be in there, but I don't think anybody who is a perpetrator or has like ties to Epstein should be protected under that. Like last episode, we were kind of talking about how if you're writing to people or emailing or texting, that you should kind of just assume that there is no privacy when it comes to that. And if you're trying to hide behind closed doors, that it'll always come to light.
And like I would personally like there to be privacy again. Like if we could get back to a place where that's sort of the expectation and not sort of this environment where you have to pre-assume that nothing is private. Like I would love that. But a lot of what has been eroding our privacy has been driven, frankly, by like the tech bros and the like social media companies and all of this. And I'm like, those are the people who are kind of on the Republican team at the moment. So like if you want to accuse the people who want transparency of the files of not valuing privacy, like maybe take a look at your own side and what you guys value and what you're pushing for,
Hmm.
and then we can talk maybe. But I would love for there to be privacy, but in this case, again, like if you're going to be corresponding about things that are wildly and potentially illegal, then I think we deserve to know.
Especially if you're a person who has so much power over things that regular citizens are partaking in every day, like when it comes to, the tech bros who are all guilty and there's evidence of against them. Like I think even their ramifications of what's been happening, all I've been seeing is um kind of more of like a public shaming type thing over an actual punishment.
I think you're exactly right that like this does the reason why we need transparency is because it has implications for everyday people that cut across more than just like the culture and the social aspect, though it does impact that as well. But also like banking and
Hmm.
trade, like big,
Internationally too.
yeah, like huge issues that are impact everyday people, whether or not they're paying attention to it or not. But hopefully this will drive attention toward who is making these calls and decisions and what they value and who they're really working on behalf of, because that's what this scandal to me is all about. But so the members who went to DOJ kind of had similar conclusions after walking out. You know, they were being asked by reporters like, "What did you see in the files? Is there anything else unredacted that we should know?" And all of them, Republican and Democrat, could agree that there are definitely pedophiles and
Right.
definitely had co-conspirators. Maxwell and Epstein were very, very bad people caught up in this like international thing that we were just talking about in coordination. And, you know, there was trafficking going on, there was underage victims. We don't necessarily know exactly how many victims, but it's just everyone can see in the files that this did in fact occur.
And I think that everyone is against um, Maxwell pleading the fifth as well. Like, I
Mhm.
think we talked about that just a little bit
Yep.
last episode as well. But she had said that um, she was asking for Trump to pardon her and then she would speak, which I honestly don't think anyone would be in favor of that. I could imagine Trump getting a lot of backlash if he decided to pardon her.
Yeah, that sounds like a quid pro quo to me. Like, I will exonerate Trump only if he pardons me.
Like,
Like,
I
what?
only see Trump winning in that scenario, but also like losing in a sense of, transparency and like why the only reason why I can see him pardoning her is if he is trying to cover up something for himself because she would clear his name. And even the Clintons too.
But like, would her exoneration, quote unquote, of Trump actually be exonerating if she's already said I would be willing to essentially like speak only if I get a pardon? Like it would be clearly transactional, and I don't
Yeah.
think it would be truly like clearing his name, even if she did, and even if he did pardon her. But yeah, the idea of pardoning Maxwell has certainly been floated, and Trump has even responded to it, saying like, "Well, I'd have to look at it. You know, many people ask me for pardons, including P. Diddy, and I would have to see." Well,
Probably Nicki Minaj too.
I think though, if he did pardon Maxwell, I could very well see that kicking off a second American Revolution just because of how massive all of this is and how people are already mad that there hasn't been enough justice for like 6 years now. And it's unconscionable to think that she would be let off the hook when even Trump himself called the Palm Beach police in 2006 and said that Maxwell was evil.
Wait. Which, if you did that in 2006, then why didn't you step up afterwards? Why were you still associating with them and having your name all up in everything when if you recognize that in 2006?
Right, and just to clarify, that was one of the files that had mentioned Trump was this report that he had made to Palm Beach police. And exactly what you just said. Some people are holding that up saying like, see, Trump was willing to, call out Epstein and Maxwell, and this shows that he had a good conscience the whole time. And
No.
then other people are holding it up saying like, well, 2006 was kind of late in the game. Yes, it was before he was before Epstein was convicted of being a sex offender, but at the same time, it kind of shows that they were very much like Trump could see what was going on and perhaps even sat on that information for a while.
Yeah, it makes me wonder what had happened that particular day or like week or whatever that made Trump want to retaliate against Maxwell. You
Maybe
know, like in Trump's
right.
attitude, like we've been talking about him for so long that I feel like we know his patterned behavior, so something must have happened. Like, like I'm thinking about when the Big Beautiful Breakup, like he has such a reputation with doing things like writing for people so hard, and then the second that they betray him, he's like, okay, let me throw you under the bus now that it doesn't benefit me anymore.
And we've already talked about in a previous episode about how they had like disagreements about real estate acquisitions, and Epstein and Trump both wanted the same property, and that didn't work out. So then they were mad at each other. And, Epstein was allegedly poaching staff members from Mar-a-Lago, and allegedly that's how Regina George got caught up in Epstein's circle. And so, yeah, they had disagreements longstanding. And so, what was the impetus behind Trump finally reporting them to police? It could be anything. And
Maybe that'll be just uncovered too.
yeah, and so that's just one kind of revelation out of the files vis-a-vis Trump. There was other stuff, but again, nothing really conclusive, like pinning Trump to a wall necessarily for
Mhm.
having committed wrongdoing, in relationship to like trafficking or that kind of thing.
I'm like, release the other 3 million files and we will go through that as well.
But I thought Pam Bondi had maybe one good point out of the entire hearing, which was she was pushing back on members. I think it was Camilla Jayapal saying, why didn't Merrick Garland and the Biden DOJ look into or investigate Epstein and his associations? And I've heard that talking point a bit, like if there was dirt on Trump, then Biden would have released it because they had access to the same files, the same information. So therefore, the fact that Biden and Garland didn't release it, they like Bondi and the Republicans will say exonerates Trump. What do you think of that?
I think that the Biden administration were also trying to protect their own. I'm so strong in that this is not a partisan issue, and there's obviously people on both sides who are guilty of these things. Kamala was on Jimmy Kimmel, and she had said, when she was asked about this, she said, quote, "We strongly and rightfully believed there should be a separation between what we wanted as an administration and what the DOJ did," which I thought was not the best answer. It's very PR-y, and I think that Kamala saying that, she was trying to insinuate that they're better than the Trump admin in terms of that the Epstein files because she's like, yeah, there's a separation. That's the DOJ's job. But you should have been pushing for that too. I don't care that you were protecting like some Democrats as well. Like this is, I like can't even stress it enough. Like it's literally not a partisan issue. And also, Bondi even bringing that up is also another layer of trying to deflect it back onto the Democrat side when there are no sides to this.
Yeah, that's a little rich coming from Kamala because the DOJ under Biden definitely engaged in lawfare even against then candidate Trump. I mean, the FBI raided his house, Mar-a-Lago. So like the DOJ has been engaged in lawfare on both sides, Republican and Democrat, in recent administrations, and this is not like again, like you said, a Democrat-Republican issue. This is a long-standing issue about the way that the DOJ is operating. And in my view, the DOJ should be able to walk and chew gum at the same time. Like they
Hmm.
can do all of the functions around deport, like looking into criminals and illegals and other people who they are targeting specifically and very vocal about like that's their interest at the moment, while also investigating politicians, particularly Trump, the Clintons, and everyone whose name shows up thousands and thousands of times in these files.
And the people who are diehard, like Trump trance, still defending Trump and the admin, are also throwing back this insult, being like, well, you guys like wanted the Clintons to be protected. And I'm like, there's not a comparison there. One, Trump is the sitting president right now. Two, who was trying to protect the Clintons? Like, I don't think that anyone was. Not that I've seen. I don't think people care about protecting them, not in the way that people care to protect Trump or the Trump admin in their eyes. I think that the Clintons should be and will be heavily questioned.
Right. I mean, as far as I know, they are still going to be testifying about, like Epstein and all that. But I wanted to bring up, there's a really funny episode that Tim Dillon did where he is basically like goading the Clintons, especially Hillary, to just like lay it all on the line and admit to all the wrongdoing that they might have been caught up in and throw Trump under the bus too. And Dillon was just going on, and I was laughing so hard listening to this episode because he was just saying like the Clintons have nothing left to lose. Like all she's ever wanted in her whole life is to be president, and that's not going to happen. So she better just lay it all on the line and just tell us exactly what happened. And he was everyone should go listen to that. It was so funny.
Yeah, and I mean, I agree with that. If you have nothing to lose, like you could be looked at as with a little more respect if you actually are honest with the American people.
Throwing it back really quickly to Kamala, since I do believe she's going to be running in 28, just my speculation. There's some early indications of that, like movement on social media and stuff. But anyway, Kamala on the campaign trail in 24 kept saying the same talking point over and over again, how she had prosecuted transnational criminal organizations. It was so like rehearsed that, I would know she was going to say
Just
it
like a
before she
wind-up
did.
doll.
Exactly. And in my view, that raises only more questions about why Biden's administration and the DOJ didn't look into Epstein, regardless of what Kamala said about wanting to have that separation. I'm like, this seems pretty transnational and pretty criminal and pretty organized to me. So this is right up Kamala's alley. Maybe he should have taken this one on, or at least like nudged other people to look into it. But
Yeah.
again, I don't think Republicans or Democrats are particularly interested in actually having transparency, and that has never been the modus operandi for either party, and now we know that clear as day.
Yeah, I've been seeing the phrase the Epstein class as a quote or a way that they're labeling what's been going on in the news and in the media. And I actually really like that label because it encapsulates all these people who are so rich and powerful and perpetrators of this long thing that has gone on for forever and all these victims who were impacted by that. Like I think that labeling it as something nonpartisan is going to help unify people against it and get people to and pressure people to actually speak out and say the truth.
And three names come to mind to me right now that we should probably talk about and what their involvement was according to these files. Howard Lutnick, who is the current Secretary of Commerce, also
Yeah.
Katherine Rumler, who was the General Counsel under Obama, and third of all, we have Ahmed bin Sulayem, who is from the UAE and like the Port Authority of Dubai. So let's start with maybe
Lutnick.
Lutnick.
Yeah, I watched a little bit of Lutnick's testimony as well. So in the files is saying that he was planning to see Epstein in 2012. Um, and he brought his four children, nanny's wife, on a family vacation, as he said, on the island. And which was also suspicious because like during his testimony, he said that he had cut off all ties with Epstein before after his conviction in 2008. So he was kind of caught, actually not kind of, he was caught lying throughout
Mhm.
this testimony. What did you see about Lutnick and what he was saying?
Yeah, absolutely. Exactly what you said. He had previously said to Miranda Devine, a New York Post journalist, saying that he had only met Epstein one time as soon as he had kind of moved to New York and they were next door neighbors, but he had this really awkward. Lutnick goes into this long-winded story about how he went over to Epstein's house for the first time with his wife, and they were both so disgusted because there was a massage table out in Epstein's house, and he said, "Do you get a massage?" And Epstein's like, "Yes, every day, and the fun kind," or something like that. And so Howard Lutnick said, "We were so disgusted that we left and we never were in the same room with him ever again." And that's just everything that he said to Miranda Devine back in October. Complete lie, essentially, according to what the files show, because
Hmm.
as you said, they literally went to his island in 2012, or at least were arranging to go to his island in 2012, which is 4 years beyond Epstein's conviction as a sex offender. So, like, why would you entertain him in that way, let alone bring your children to go to his island? Like, it's so backward and messed up. People were calling for Lutnick to resign.
Yeah, and even I think the mention of him bringing his children and his wife, like he was saying it as if that was going to exonerate him of any ties. Like, why would I bring my children and wife if I'm doing vile crimes? Like, obviously not. Like, I'm a family man. Like, I think that's disgusting and such an outright lie. And what, and even to bring your kids to that island if you did, like, I don't know. I don't know what to say about it. Like, it's really weird.
It's definitely weird. And again, just underscoring this doesn't show or prove that Lutnick was involved in any criminal activity relative to Epstein. And just the fact that he's associated with Epstein is not make him guilty by association. But it does just call into question his character and his judgment, I think. Like this is your next door neighbor. You're telling me you've never Googled him in all of the years that you've known him, and again, beyond his conviction, that didn't raise any like flags to you. It's more of a question of, I think, judgment, which for people who are literally running our country or cabinet secretaries, we would hope that judgment would be one trait that they possessed, but not always.
Alas.
If only.
If only. Yeah, he was outright lying in what he was saying in his testimony. And I think there was also a mention that there was an email exchange between Epstein and Lutnick about his nannies or something
Mhm.
like that, which I also think is really
'Cause
suspicious.
Epstein didn't have kids, so like, what the hell was that
Like,
about?
why would you need one of his nannies? Which is really strange. I don't know. It's just like this is very suspicious, and the way that he was acting, I have to bring up again the theme of like projection and deflection is what it seems to me everyone's been doing in terms of this. Like, why are you getting so angry? Why are you mixing up your story so much? At this, like, I have to say, like, they're sounding very, very, very guilty.
Actually, let me go back and qualify. I said Epstein had no kids, but that we know of, because the files also show he was really interested in sort of like kind of what Elon Musk has done in terms of like having many, many, many kids with many different women. And like he was interested in the idea of genetics and like kind of what the natalists are into about like
Which I
spreading
also
their genes.
think
And
is sick. We've
it's a
talked
whole
about
thing.
natalism before, actually, around a year ago in
Yeah.
one of our past episodes.
And this just seems to be like an interest of a lot of these very wealthy, like billionaires, whatever. I don't know why exactly,
I think it's
but
because I think their genetics are like
superior.
superior and they're like, well, I need to make sure to produce as much as possible because the world needs more of what I have, which is
Yeah.
like the whole natalism thing. Anyways, we don't have to
It's
talk,
just
we don't have to get into that.
shockingly gross if you ask me.
Me too.
But I think we can go to Katherine Rumler, who was general counsel in Obama's White House.
Hmm.
What was her kind of connections with Epstein?
Yeah, she stepped down from Goldman Sachs, and she also appeared in the emails.
She was mentioned thousands of times, similar to other people like Trump. But in particular, there was a really questionable message. She messaged directly with Epstein, I want to say, beyond the point where he was, again, a convicted sex offender. And so she messaged him on his birthday saying, "Happy birthday. I hope you enjoy the day with your one true love." I think this was in 2012, by the way.
Hmm.
And Epstein responded saying, "They say that men usually give a name to their penis, as it would be inappropriate to make love to a total stranger." Then she replied, "Hard to believe that there is still an open question about whether men are the inferior gender." And she misspelled "the" because, as we mentioned last time, these people cannot type to save their lives.
Yeah.
And this was in the New York Post, talking about how she just last week stepped down from Goldman Sachs. And apparently that message was the one that was just like beyond the pale, inappropriate. And, I would venture to guess there was a lot in the files beyond that that was beyond the pale, but that apparently was the one that really did it for people.
Yeah, that really does it for me too. I have to say, not only the fact that she's mentioned so many times within the files, but to even if it is like it's some sick joke or it's just so crude and disgusting.
Yeah, and again, she's mentioned thousands of times. I even did a little personal search down
Yeah, what did you
that
see that
lane.
maybe legacy media didn't hasn't caught yet?
Well, I have seen some stuff, but I'm still kind of piecing it together. I don't want to jump to any conclusions. I will say there's people on Twitter who are kind of going the same direction as my own personal investigation has been going, so I'm going to hold off on jumping to conclusions. But if you go on Twitter, you will see some of the early stuff that's starting to come out that I think is yet to and will continue to emerge. But so I also wanted to bring up Rep. Jasmine Crockett lit into Bondi in a pretty scathing part of this hearing, and she had mentioned like Trump was mentioned in, or someone mentioned that Trump was in the Epstein files more times than Harry Potter is mentioned in Harry Potter, or more times than God is mentioned in the
In the
Bible.
Bible, yeah, I saw that one
It's just
too.
like, again, we don't want to condone guilt by association, but like,
But like,
Jesus. Um,
yeah,
anyway, so that I think is pretty much it with Rumler for right now. I do think more will emerge on her though.
yeah.
And then the other one was Ahmed bin Sulayem, and his name was particularly mentioned because there was a reference to torture. Did you see that?
Yeah, really sick. He stepped down as well. Which in stepping down from positions as well, I think I mentioned this, but I don't think it's enough. Like, I need the DOJ to actually look into them and lock these people up. Um, do you have specifically what was mentioned in
With
terms of,
Suleiman?
yeah.
Well, okay, so last week there was the email that emerged that was redacted. We couldn't tell who it was from, where Epstein messaged this person, like, "I love the torture video, by the way."
Hmm.
And so that file immediately became very prominent. Everyone was talking about it, but we're like, who is this to? Like, no one knew because it was redacted. So that was one that Thomas Massie went specifically when he was at DOJ and looked at. And he tweeted soon after leaving DOJ, like, this was actually a sultan. And then he didn't mention the sultan by name because I think Massie and Khanna have been trying to let DOJ take the lead on revealing co-conspirators and their involvement and all that.
Which they're not really, but
Not, yeah, so far it hasn't happened. So then eventually Todd Blanche shot back at Massie, and in my understanding, indicated in a way that revealed that which sultan this was about, this exchange, and then Massie soon confirmed after that, yes, it was Ahmed bin Sulayem who had received the message from Epstein, like, thanks for the torture video.
yeah,
So
they're
just ridiculous.
yeah, and he has stepped down too. I think the hard part about the files too and like going through everything and connections to Epstein is honestly figuring out how much power and like where these people are coming from. I think that I've tried to do a lot of research about, like how is this guy connected to Epstein or like how are these people billionaires? I feel like we've been searching this up so often, which I also think is such an international web of people that people don't even know, like we said in the beginning of the episode, how connected they are to individuals like us, like normal people.
Yeah, and another person who's been identified in one of the files as a co-conspirator although there is question about whether this was like as part of a lineup or like in what way a co-conspirator. But the name Les Wexner has come up a lot. He's a billionaire, lives in Ohio, former CEO, founder of Abercrombie Fitch and Bath and Body Works. And he was kind of like the primary client for Epstein's like money management firm. And so his name has been mentioned in association with Epstein for a while because the two of them seem to be very close in communication and also like I want to say like worldview, like the things that they talk about and discuss, it seems like they overlapped quite a bit. And so people are just asking questions like Les Wexner was very wealthy. He made Epstein very wealthy, allegedly like gave him a lot of stuff. I want to say I don't want to say for free because he was like employing him to
In a
manage his money,
business
but
wise.
yeah, a lot of like legs up, a lot of I think he even gave him a property, but anyway. Uh so people are asking now, like, what does Les Wexner know about him? And now he is going to be deposed as well, relative to Epstein investigation.
Yeah, I'm really interested to what he says as well, um, in terms of, like everything about Epstein because of how closely tied they are. Um, when is that gonna be? Do you know?
Actually, I'm not sure. I just know that, again, his name has come up for years now. I think it was Whitney Webb who had kind of tied the two together initially, Epstein and Wexner. And then Wexner had kind of evaded having to, be deposed or anything like this for a while.
Hmm.
And then again, this latest batch of files kind of showed that Webb and others were onto something in questioning their affiliation with one another. And then Massie confirmed that when Caitlin Collins asked him about co-conspirators and who was listed in one of these documents by the FBI as a co-conspirator.
I think that anyone who continued association with Epstein after 2009, after he was convicted, as a registered sex offender, should be questioned heavily.
Definitely.
um uh, in terms of their association, in terms of what they know, because like because after that was like very public knowledge, so I'm very confused as to why people would stick around him, honestly, and continue to email them unless they just had a feeling or whatever that they would never get caught, which I mean we talked about a lot last episode as well in terms of people who don't ever expect any ramifications for their actions.
Yeah, exactly. So another person who I think should answer some questions is Alan Dershowitz, who was Epstein's lawyer. He has been one of the people saying that it's completely unfair that they're only redacting the victims' names. He called it McCarthyism, that like all the associations of Epstein are coming out, and yet like some of the victims and the accusers' names are not being mentioned because he said basically Dershowitz was saying like how can we answer to allegations if we don't even know who's accusing us of XYZ? And I don't know. It's an interesting point to consider, but I personally just don't have much sympathy for Dershowitz in the way that he was not only fighting pretty hard on behalf of Epstein, as his lawyer, which is one thing, but then also in kind of a personal capacity, it just seems like the more that the heat has gone up about Epstein, Dershowitz has gotten increasingly uncomfortable and angry and defensive in a way that we don't want it to become McCarthyism where it's like, well, you're getting mad about us questioning you, therefore you did something wrong. Like, I get that that's not how we should conduct investigations, but I do think,
I
um,
think if there's enough evidence or if you're mentioned enough, have close ties, like you shouldn't be worried about being questioned if you didn't do anything wrong.
exactly.
Like if your names are mentioned and you're completely innocent, then why wouldn't you be open to questioning when this is such a huge scandal and so many victims involved? When it comes to victims' names being redacted, I completely disagree with what he was saying about that too, because I don't know. In journalism, we've also learned to talk about these things and like when you're reporting on things like this and victims like don't want to be mentioned for the concern of their own safety, especially with such a big power imbalance of how these people are so rich and wealthy and it's such a popularized story right now. Like people who are rich and wealthy, whose names are out there, and if they're guilty, like they can even afford like bodyguards and like protection right now versus like just regular people affected and victims. They shouldn't have to live their entire lives being known as, an Epstein victim or have these people in power like be afraid of these people in power possibly retaliating against them in some way.
Yeah, like being retaliated against legally is one thing. If the victims are, accused of defamation or sued for that, it could bankrupt them for sure. And also being afraid for their physical safety and security, because again, powerful people and powerful networks can, I mean, we've seen this historically, pull off some pretty crazy disappearances and even killings, and so like that's a real concern. Marjorie Taylor Greene was on Twitter explaining that, like why the victims might not want their names out there. To me, it makes sense for the reasons you just said. Another interesting dynamic to it, though, however, is that okay, the congressmen, Mace and Massie, have both posted publicly that they're not suicidal and that they love life. And that's, again, I think being prompted by the threats that have kind of emerged against them by people angry about what's coming out in the files, and just shows you the level of intensity and incivility that we've arrived at as a society.
And how much fear there is of how far somebody would go to cover something up too.
Exactly. Another thing I wanted to point out, though, so Lauren Boebert had said as soon as she was leaving DOJ, and Mace has also followed up saying the same thing, that some of the people who have been identified as victims or, emerged as victims also were perpetrators in that they were helping Epstein to recruit girls. Maybe it didn't start out that way. Maybe they started out purely as victims and then it evolved into something like helping to recruit other girls. That's something that should also be investigated, I think. And I think, that just makes sense to me. There's probably situationally stuff going on there about how they were being in a way like controlled and
Like
influenced.
a pawn by some higher influence.
But I don't think that they should be completely exonerated either. And if we're going to be investigating this as we keep saying that we should, then yeah, look into those victims as well.
Yeah, I think all of it needs to be looked at more closely and carefully. And, I don't really trust Pam Bondi and the DOJ to continue to do so.
As we said, DOJ can walk and chew gum at the same time, and they should. And do you think that anyone is going in the administration is going to be fired over this?
I think that they should, definitely. I have a horrible feeling that they won't be because I think that a lot of the Trump admin and right now is very protective of their own. And you even see that in the way that, Pam Bondi talks so highly of Trump in the way that she's not even persecuting or looking into people like, Phelan and Feinberg, and there was mentions of them there. So I don't know. I'm hoping that people are held accountable more than just like a public shame aspect. I think that you could gain a lot more respect if you actually looked at this as a nonpartisan issue and held people accountable in not being allowed to hold positions like this anymore. But I just doubt that that's going to happen.
I think that Lutnick should go just for the simple fact he's been exposed to have blatantly lied about his affiliations. I think that should be enough for him to go. I also think Bondi should go, if nothing else, for how poorly her hearing went. I think made the administration look terrible, whether they acknowledge that or not. I just think she's fallen down on the job in so many ways throughout the handling of the Epstein investigation. I'm surprised that she hasn't been out already, to be honest with you. Similarly with Patel, FBI director, also has made conflicting, contradictory statements about what people knew and when in a very damaging way. Dan Bongino already left the administration, not necessarily because of Epstein, but people were very angry with him at that time when he did leave over Epstein. Um, who else? I think that would be a decent place to start over Epstein.
Anything that comes to, like you said, like lying or anything like that when it's caught on camera, I think is enough to look into them and think to ourselves, maybe they shouldn't be in a position where they are in control of so much of the narrative and are, yeah, like actually lying to people.
I don't know if I want to go here exactly, but there is conflicting information too coming out through the files that about the nature of Epstein's death and was it a suicide or something more
Yeah.
nefarious. And Bondi has been very vocal explaining why the missing minute at the detention center where Epstein was being held, where but essentially there's a missing minute from the CCTV footage around his cell where potentially it had been doctored or edited in some way. And Bondi had previously said in the July cabinet meeting where she was explaining why that minute went missing, saying like, "Oh, that's just like an automatic reset that happens at 11:59 p.m. every single night." Well, that was proven to be not the
But
case. And just more and more has emerged. There was also a press release in the files that had a date announcing Epstein's death that was a day before his body was actually found. And everyone
mhm.
is saying, like, well, what the hell is that about? Was it a mistake? Is this, evidence that they were anticipating his death? It's just not clear at the moment. So that, again, that's why I don't want to totally go there. But when you combine that with the missing footage, the PR announcement of his death, the autopsy results done a couple of years back, and all of that kind of in combination does, I think, raise questions about how Epstein died and what DOJ knows about that currently.
And maybe more information will come out about that as well. Like, I've seen that conspiracy float around for years and years and years that maybe Epstein's suicide wasn't actually a suicide, or I mean, there's some crazy ones about like him still being alive and stuff like that, just to escape everything. But yeah, I also don't really want to go too far into that.
Yeah, I personally believe he is dead, but that's just one person's opinion.
I do want to say one more thing about, everything Epstein-wise in general. I am a little bit disappointed in the way that legacy media hasn't been covering it as much as I think it should be. I mean, last time we kind of talked about how this is genuinely the biggest news story scandal of our lifetime. Like, there's people being brought down one by one by one, and for good reason. And I just don't think that they're covering it as detailed or as well as they should be. I mean, Colin and I are only a team of two here at Washed Up, and
We're
we
laughing
also
right now.
we also have 9 to 5s. Like, we're like this is like our side gig right now, and how are we doing better at it than legacy media? Anyways, that's all I wanted to say, not to toot our own
No,
horn.
that's a great point. I think part of it might be like fear, where I think
And we're fearless.
well, there's so much conflicting information in the files that I think some of the legacy media is probably nervous about verifying all the claims. So if I'm giving them as much due diligence and benefit of the doubt as I can, maybe they're just being very careful sifting through the myriad documents and only going with the verifiable, provable facts. And maybe that has taken them a while to formulate, the truth. And that's my giving them the benefit of the doubt. The other side of that being like they're just falling down on the job, not even trying because they're afraid of the powers that be who might punish them in one way or another for covering this.
hmm Or powers that like have influence over their media outlet.
But particularly the right-wing media, who under Biden's administration was saying that Biden's cognitive decline was the biggest cover-up in American history. I think I would venture to say this one might be bigger.
I would
Um,
venture to say this one is bigger.
Yeah. So like if you really are wanting to keep your own side clean, I think starting to report more and more about, the more time that goes by with the files being out there, the less excuse there is to be covering um, who was involved,
hmm
who still needs to be held accountable.
Especially legacy media who have the influence and the resources to actually go out and talk to people and money and stuff like that. Like, I don't know. I think we're doing a pretty good job for two people who don't have any money and are doing this as a side gig.
Agreed. Maybe we can do some last minute wrap ups on some other stories we'd reported on, like Minneapolis, maybe. I think
Hmm.
that's
Yeah, that's a
wrapping
pretty
up.
big one. They're pulling troops out, which I think is good. I'm hoping that everyone in Minneapolis are doing okay and that their community continues to, like rebuild and stuff after having so much tragedy struck there.
Yeah, so Tom Homan, who was overseeing now Operation Metro Surge, is what it was called. He is pulling the remaining ICE agents out after already having pulled 700 last week. And to me, it's been a crazy start to 2026. I think we can all agree
Like
with
I can't believe it's only halfway through February and yeah,
with
sorry.
no,
Like,
like with Venezuela, Minneapolis, and the Epstein files. But at the same time, I also think two of those stories, at least, Minneapolis and Epstein, are heading in the right direction, where we are kind of seeing movement. Where previously, I think it would have been hard to imagine that those stories would actually come around and resolve in a way that I think the majority of Americans would be content about. And we're still not quite there yet, but I see it unfolding. I see it happening. So I'm actually optimistic ending this whole episode that on Epstein in Minneapolis, things might be going a good way.
I'm leaning a bit more optimistic, but I want to see more people being held accountable. I'll say
It's
that.
gonna it's gonna take some healing and some self-reflection and some change at the highest levels before we actually can, say it's all wrapped up with a nice little bow.
Right.
And yeah,
Yeah.
that's all for me.
Any other updates that you want to talk about, or is that all for now?
That's all I got.
Okay.
Washed
Washed up
about.
out.